The show opens with a funeral scene where an elderly rabbi honors Sarah Ironson, a woman who has passed away. He reflects on her generation of immigrants, praising her bravery and dedication in establishing a community in the United States. Meanwhile, Joe Pitt, a Mormon Republican clerk in the U.S. Court of Appeals, is visiting Roy Cohn, a lawyer and friend, in his office. As Roy juggles multiple phone calls, he offers Joe a position of associate assistant at the Justice Department in Washington. Excited by the opportunity, Joe tells Roy that he needs to talk it over with his wife before making a decision, and then leaves the office. At Joe's home, his wife Harper is listening to the radio and preparing a meal. She is addicted to a drug named Valium and suffers anxiety and hallucinations. As she is talking to herself, she suddenly imagines a travel agent visiting her. In this vision, the agent, who once sold them a ticket to Brooklyn, tries to sell them another trip. Harper, feeling unsettled, shares her confusion with the agent and questions herself whether her husband truly loves her. Just then, Joe arrives home, prompting the travel agent to vanish into thin air. When Joe asks Harper if she likes the idea of moving to Washington, she gives him a series of unreasonable excuses, such as needing to finish painting a room. Joe reassures her that she has plenty of time to complete the task, but Harper expresses her fear about doing it on her own. She explains that she feels scared and does not want to go in the room alone, claiming she hears unsettling metal scraping sounds as if someone is in the house with a knife. After Sarah's funeral, her grandson Louis is devastated to learn that his boyfriend, Pryor, has contracted AIDS, which plunges him into a state of panic. When Louis asks Pryor why he did not share this news earlier, Pryor reveals that he was afraid Louis would leave him. The conversation is abruptly cut short as Louis hurries to catch a bus to the cemetery to bury his grandmother. Despite his efforts to care for Pryor, Louis quickly becomes overwhelmed by the emotional strain. Seeking advice, he turns to the rabbi, only to be left disheartened when the rabbi offers no guidance on how to handle the immense challenge of supporting a loved one in such a critical time. Back at Joe's home, Joe is trying to convince Harper of the importance of moving to Washington. However, Harper resists, offering various unreasonable excuses. Joe argues that she does not understand the outside world because she rarely leaves the house, highlighting her emotional nature. Harper responds by saying that she does go out and is aware of the world beyond their home. Their argument escalates, with Harper accusing Joe of never should have married her. After taking some time to cool down, Harper approaches Joe to discuss having a baby, but he does not respond. She then shares the news she heard on the radio, expressing her fear that the world might be soon coming to an end. The next day, Joe finds Louis crying in the courthouse bathroom, where they both work. Despite their differing roles, Joe does not recognize Louis, but Louis knows Joe very well. They form an unexpected bond, partly fueled by Louis's suspicion that Joe might be gay. Louis, who works with word processing, briefly mentions a sick friend when Joe asks about his tears, but he does not go into detail about his own troubles. He thanks Joe for his concern, noting that his other colleagues had simply walked away when they saw him crying. As their brief conversation ends and Louis is about to leave, he gives Joe a kiss on the cheek. In the following scene, Pryor is seen taking a large amount of medication as he prepares for sleep, while Harper is also using Valium to escape into her hallucinations. Despite having never met in the real world, their paths intersect in a shared dream sequence. In this surreal dream, Pryor appears dressed as a drag queen, which leaves Harper bewildered. They find themselves in a fantastical setting where they begin to reveal their personal truths. Pryor, on the edge of revelation, admits that he is homosexual, while Harper confesses that she uses Valium. Their conversation continues, with Harper revealing that Pryor is ill. She then asks him to share something about her. Pryor tells her that she is profoundly unhappy, a fact she already knows because of her dependence on Valium. Seeking a more surprising insight, Harper urges Pryor to reveal something unexpected. Pryor responds by disclosing that her husband, Joe, is homosexual. Harper is unable to accept this revelation and decides to leave the dream. But before she departs, Harper reveals one final truth to Pryor, that his inner self is free from disease. As Harper fades away, Pryor starts to remove his drag makeup, still criticizing the final truth Harper revealed. Suddenly, a bright light appears, accompanied by a falling white feather and the sound of a woman singing. The singing brings Pryor out of the dream, waking him up from this surreal and revealing experience. After waking from her hallucination, Harper intentionally burns Joe's dinner that night and demands to know where he has been as he arrives home. She wants Joe to tell her the truth, the same truth Pryor had revealed to her. As their argument gets more heated, Joe directly asks if she has any specific questions to ask him. Harper then admits she is afraid of him. This makes Joe retreat to the bedroom. As he starts changing, Harper follows and asks him directly if he is homosexual. Joe, unsettled by the question, gets dressed and prepares to leave. Harper stops him and insists that he must tell her the truth. However, Joe denies her accusation and insists that the confrontation does not make any difference to their situation. Later, Joe suggests that they pray to God for strength, but Harper refuses. Joe explains that he is trying to be a better man by confronting and eliminating his inner struggles. In response, Harper reveals that she is pregnant and expresses her fear that their child might end up addicted to drugs and lost in hallucinations. Joe attempts to confess the truth about Harper's pregnancy, but Harper gives him mixed signals, leaving the situation unclear. As a result, Harper leaves the room, noting that at least now they both have secrets to keep. That same night, Pryor discusses his worsening symptoms with Louis, who is upset that Pryor has not shared his struggles sooner. Louis questions whether Pryor would be angry if he decides to leave him alone in such a situation, to which Pryor responds with a gentle kiss on Louis's forehead, acknowledging that he would be upset. After this tender moment, Pryor quickly goes to sleep, leaving Louis to grapple with his own feelings. During a doctor's appointment, Roy learns from Dr. Henry that he has been diagnosed with AIDS. Roy is unsettled by the diagnosis, as he associates AIDS with drug addicts or homosexuals. While he has no history of drug use, Dr. Henry acknowledges his past relationships with men. He views homosexuality as a weakness, and is determined not to publicly acknowledge that he is gay or that he has AIDS. Instead, he falsely claims that he has liver cancer. Roy then threatens Dr. Henry, warning him that he will use his influence to ruin his reputation and career if he reveals Roy's homosexual status. Disgusted by Roy's refusal to face the truth, Dr. Henry urges him to use his influence to access an experimental drug for AIDS. In the next scene, Pryor is shown in intense pain, with cracked lips and struggling to breathe as he crawls toward the bathroom. He calls out for Louis, who, upon discovering him, panics. Although Pryor advises against it, Louis quickly dials for help and hurries to assist him. As Louis tries to support Pryor, he ends up covered in Pryor's blood. Pryor then collapses unconscious onto the ground. Simultaneously, Joe returns home after their earlier argument about his sexuality, to find Harper sitting in the dimly lit living room, listening to music. When Joe asks her what's wrong, she again mentions her fear of someone being in their bedroom with a knife. Harper admits she's considering another hallucinatory trip due to the growing divide between them. Joe urges her not to leave, assuring her they can mend their relationship. He then shares a biblical story where a young man wrestles with an angel, symbolizing a struggle with predetermined fate. Joe expresses his desire to break free from what he sees as immoral gay tendencies conflicting with his faith, and Harper empathizes with his inner disturbance, trying to comfort him. She also reveals uncertainty about her pregnancy, and suggests Joe should take Roy's offer to move to Washington alone. Joe insists on staying together, but Harper insists she may leave him. Returning to Louis and Pryor's situation, with Pryor now hospitalized, Louis shares his concerns with a nurse who is attending to Pryor. Overwhelmed by the prospect of witnessing Pryor's death, Louis decides he cannot stay at the hospital. He leaves and heads to Central Park, seeking a casual encounter with a stranger. In an act of self-destructive behavior, Louis allows a man he meets to have unprotected intimate relation with him, despite knowing the man has HIV. When the protection measure breaks during their encounter, Louis requests that the man intentionally infect him, but the man refuses and walks away. Just across the street from Louis's encounter in the park, Joe and Roy are sitting together at a bar. Joe confides in Roy about his struggles with Harper, and how he has been relying on his faith, but feels lost without clear answers. Roy, somewhat intoxicated, attempts to console Joe in a manipulative manner. He suggests that Joe should consider leaving his wife and make a firm decision about moving to Washington. He persistently tries to persuade Joe, grasping at various arguments, even invoking father-son relationships by suggesting a good son would sacrifice anything for his father. Outside the bar, Roy discloses that he is dying from cancer and urges Joe to consider moving to Washington. Back in the hospital, Pryor receives a visit from his best friend Belize, who is now a nurse and a former drag queen. Belize comforts Pryor, assuring him that Louis will return to him. During their conversation, Pryor confides in Belize that he hears voices, which he believes are keeping him alive, but Belize remains doubtful. After Belize departs, Pryor hears the voice again, who claims to be a messenger preparing him for an impending significant event, and promising to return soon. In a subsequent scene, Roy and Joe dine with Martin, one of Roy's associates, who attempts to persuade Joe to accept a position at the Justice Department by criticizing liberalism. This dinner provides insight into Roy's influence over his Republican associates, showcasing how he commands their loyalty. During the meal, Roy reveals to Joe a troubling truth, saying that he is facing disbarment due to mishandling a client's funds, and seeks Joe's assistance to avoid legal consequences. Roy exploits Joe's reputation for moral integrity to convince him into considering the job offer. To demonstrate his authority, Roy even has his subordinate massage him to alleviate a cramp, likely related to his HIV diagnosis. The following morning, Louis starts packing his belongings from the apartment he shares with Pryor. Later, while having his meal outside the courthouse, Joe joins him and they casually begin talking. Joe inquires about Pryor, and Louis soberly remarks that things will never be the same again. They transition into discussing politics and surprisingly find themselves drawn to each other, despite Joe's kind demeanor contrasting with his past support for Reagan. As they converse, Joe mentions his unconventional eating habits involving hot dogs, Pepto-Bismol, and Coke, which leaves him with a pink mustache. During a discussion about their differing political views and shared anxieties about the country's future, Louis affectionately wipes away the pink residue before leaving Joe to finish his lunch. After his lunch with Louis, Joe finds himself in Central Park around 4 a.m., using a payphone to call his mother, Hannah Pitt. She advises him to go home before talking further. She scolds him for calling so late, but Joe explains he enjoys being in the park at night. He then questions her about whether his father truly loved him, eventually revealing to her that he is homosexual. Hannah redirects the conversation to discuss his father, suggesting that Joe should have known his father never loved him, which shocks Joe. She abruptly ends the call, stating she raised him to be better than his current situation. Back at the hospital, Louis arrives to deliver the news that he is leaving Pryor. In a heated exchange, Pryor reacts by angrily lashing out at Louis, labeling him as pathetic and incapable of truly loving anyone. Pryor dismisses Louis's emotions, asserting that they hold no value if Louis cannot stand by him. The confrontation intensifies with Pryor shouting for Louis to leave, which eventually prompts Louis to walk away from the room. At the same time, Joe arrives home and meets Harper, leading to a pivotal moment in their relationship. Harper, knowing Joe has returned from one of his reflective walks, expects him to delve into his inner conflict, struggling between his desire to be seen as a heterosexual man and the reality of his homosexuality, a dilemma he feels is being neglected. Before Joe could express himself, Harper erupts into an anxious outburst about needing to escape once more. Feeling desperate, Joe opens up to Harper, admitting he cannot reconcile the intense internal battle he faces, describing it as a searing spike through his chest. Joe then reveals that he called Harper's gynecologist and discovered she is not pregnant. Harper counters that she has been seeing a different gynecologist now. This revelation shatters Harper, who breaks down, lamenting that their entire relationship has been based on lies. Joe, fighting with his own realization, acknowledges that he presents the metaphorical monsters that haunt Harper, the man with the knives. Meanwhile, Joe begins bleeding from the mouth and rushes to the bathroom. Convinced by Joe's unsettling words, Harper flees their confrontation, calling out for Mr. Lies, the imaginary travel agent who she believes can take her away. Mr. Lies guides Harper through the refrigerator to the icy plains of Antarctica, a place where she hopes to find solace and escape from her sorrow. In the next scene, Pryor returns to his apartment and hears a voice note from Belize, advising him to take care of himself. That night, as Pryor sleeps, he is visited by two ancestors named Pryor Walter. These ancestors reveal that they died from plagues in their own times. They have come to announce his upcoming important role, referring to the messenger whose voice he has been hearing lately. They instruct Pryor to prepare for the messenger's arrival. As the ancestors describe the messenger, Pryor asks if he is going to die. They reply that they are not allowed to discuss his fate. One ancestor warns that he will have to face death alone, while the other reveals that he is destined to be a prophet, which is a great honor for the Walter family. To emphasize their message, the ancestors produce flames from their hands, instructing Pryor to prepare for the messenger's arrival. They then vanish, taking the flames with them. In a cafe, Louis meets Belize and starts to ramble anxiously about political and racial issues, inadvertently offending Belize with his disjointed comments. Belize cuts him off, bluntly pointing out that Louis seems ambivalent about everything, including his feelings for Pryor, who truly needs his support. Meanwhile, Pryor is being examined by the same nurse at the hospital. He mentions that he is feeling a bit better since being admitted, but he still struggles with anxiety about his mental state. As Pryor speaks to her, he imagines the nurse talking in a different language called Hebrew, but she clarifies that she is not speaking that language. The nurse then suggests that Pryor should consider seeing a therapist to help manage his stress. During this visit, Pryor experiences a vision of a religious text appearing through the hospital's floor and then disappearing, which heightens his sense of panic. Noticing that the nurse does not react to distressing vision of the religious textbook, Pryor becomes more cautious. He decides not to mention the vision and quickly leaves the room, feeling unsettled by the encounter. Outside the cafe, Louis explains to Belize that though he loves Pryor, he could not accompany him because his illness made him think he will be sick too, and asks Belize to tell Pryor that he loves him. Louis mentions all his incidents, claiming that he is also dying, but Belize does not really believe him. In the next scene, Harper immerses herself in a fantasy where she finds herself in the serene, snowy landscapes of Antarctica with Mr. Lies. Here, she feels a sense of numbness and safety, longing to remain in this desolate environment forever. Harper envisions creating her own world in the snow, dreaming of staying there indefinitely with a companion. She asks Mr. Lies to be her companion, but he refuses, explaining that travel agents should not become involved with their clients in such personal ways. He also adds that even within hallucinations, there are rules that must be followed. As they talk, Harper notices a figure standing at a distance and inquires about who it is. Mr. Lies responds that the figure is an Eskimo. Harper decides to approach this person and bids farewell to Mr. Lies, ready to leave with the Eskimo. Meanwhile, Hannah arrives in New York City from Salt Lake City, Utah, only to find herself lost when Joe fails to pick her up at the airport. She encounters a mentally unstable homeless woman who initially shows little interest in Hannah's plight. However, when Hannah mentions the Mormon Visitors Center, the woman's demeanor changes. She offers Hannah directions, guiding her towards her destination. As Hannah prepares to leave with her bag, the homeless woman delivers a cryptic warning, saying that everyone will be insane in the next century. Hannah, unfazed by the prediction, does not reply and continues on her way, trying to navigate the unfamiliar city. Joe visits Roy at his home and informs him that he cannot accept the job offer in Washington. He shares details about the previous night, including that Harper is missing and he also failed to pick up her mother from the airport. Joe expresses a desire to be part of Roy's world, but says he has already caused too much damage and won't break the law to protect Roy. In a furious response, Roy calls Joe a sissy and criticizes him for his decisions regarding Harper. He then reveals one of his most controversial achievements from the past. He illegally interfered in the spying trial of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, ensuring their execution. Roy admits he manipulated the judge to secure their death sentences, leaving Joe stunned by Roy's evident disregard for ethics. Joe is visibly shocked by Roy's actions and moral corruption. Roy then claims that he is not actually dying and begins to physically assault Joe. Joe, taken aback, almost retaliates with a punch but ultimately decides to walk away. After Joe leaves, Roy is alone in the room when he is visited by the ghost of Ethel Rosenberg to mark his last days on Earth. She appears to take delight in his suffering, but Roy, trying to maintain his composure, insists that he is not afraid of her or of death. Despite his arrogance, Ethel calls an ambulance for him. That same night, Pryor's ancestors appear once more, interrupting his sleep. They dance around him with excitement, announcing that the messenger will arrive that night. They urge him to join in their dance, but he declines their offer. So, they suggest that he close his eyes to be accompanied by someone familiar. Pryor imagines Louis coming back to him for a romantic dance. The vision quickly fades, but Pryor continues to hear the angelic voice. He even speaks the messenger's words but eventually makes himself silent. Later, Joe finds Louis in the park late at night and admits that he followed him from work. With some hesitation, Joe gently touches Louis's cheek. Although Louis is still confused by Joe's conflicting religious and political beliefs, he responds with a kiss. Joe then confesses that he thinks he is a terrible person to be loved. But Louis, grappling with his own guilt over Pryor, acknowledges that they both share that burden. He invites Joe to come home with him. Joe hesitates initially but eventually agrees to follow Louis home. Back at Pryor's apartment, he is startled when the entire place starts shaking and collapsing violently. The ceiling collapses as the winged messenger angel makes her entrance. She addresses Pryor as a prophet, indicating the beginning of the great works that are about to unfold. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notification, and leave 1,000 likes or 100 comments if you'd like us to continue part 2. Thank you.